we remember how much effort the Conservatives put into outreach with many of these communities, minority communities in the country, trying to build support, and it worked. And then it all flipped in 2015, and now they're trying very hard to make those inroads again, as we've heard. So what are you watching for in that story?
Well, certainly this idea of vote splits. I think there's going to be a lot of places in Ontario where we are going to see a strong vote from three parties. And how does that potentially benefit the Conservatives, which would be less susceptible to that? I think the Conservatives are looking to win back a lot of these ridings that they had previously won, and they see opportunity, especially where there are no incumbents, such as Brampton East. It's all new faces, and the Conservatives are hoping to win that back. So, certainly they're trying to take advantage of the fact that the centre progressives would split the vote, and thus ensuring a Conservative win.
Okay. Any thoughts on that, Professor Miljan?
That is the question for this election campaign, is how are those votes going to separate? I mean, one of the reasons why Andrew Scheer and the Conservatives don't spend a lot of time attacking the NDP is that they know that a strong NDP equals a weak Liberal Party, and that they are much more likely to come up the middle and win some seats back. So I think that this is sort of the narrative of this campaign, why the Conservatives aren't really panicked, and why they still focus their attention on lowering the strength of the support for the Liberals, hoping that in some cases the NDP does split the vote and gives a potential pathway of victory for the Conservative Party.
We've got some phone calls here. Get to a couple of them. If I don't get to all of them, there's at the top of the clock, 2 o'clock Eastern Time, my colleague Mark Sutcliffe will be here. He'll be here for 2 hours taking your calls on the election campaign. But here's a quick call from Christopher in Ottawa. Wants to talk about the campaign in Ontario. Christopher, what are your thoughts on the election and election day?
Well, I've already voted. I got somebody else to vote today, so that was good. First-time voter for them. The thing that kind of annoyed me, though, is Doug Ford dropped the basic income experiment here in Ontario, and I had really hoped that the Liberals would have picked it up and maybe carried it. I would have loved to have seen basic income experimented on a much wider scale.
Yeah, okay, so that didn't happen. It's I know it's in the policies of at least the Green Party and maybe a couple of others as well. Other countries have tried the basic income idea. It started out as a conversation early in the campaign. It was raised at a number of different points, and then it just kind of disappeared. But Laura Stone, it speaks to that affordability issue, right? I mean, for a lot of Canadians, but this issue itself, taking a run at as a country as a basic income, and it was tried in Ontario and dropped. Affordability issue's big, but we didn't hear specifically about that very much in the campaign, and this voter says we should have.
No, it's a good point. We didn't. I think the Liberals had spoken about it in the previous Parliament, talking about the issue, but it's not something that the Liberals had proposed at all during the campaign. They were more focused on those quintessential, quote unquote, middle class issues that we hear so much about. But it's interesting that the caller thought that should have been talked about more, especially in light of the opportunity, perhaps, seeing as Ontario cancelled the pilot project early on in their government.
Professor Miljan, the jumping off that notion to this whole idea about issues in the campaign, that's kind of a meaty conversation that some people wanted to have about how we provide people with a guaranteed income in times where it can be very challenging to families and to individuals. What about the issues campaign? Were voters well served?
Issues? What issues? I mean, I thought this was going to be an election on climate change policy. We certainly got a little bit of that, but it was almost like we were waiting for the debates to happen. There was only the one in English that all the party leaders were a part of, and I think people were really hoping that was where it was going to solidify, and we were going to talk about the policy differences between the different political campaigns. And it wasn't anything like that. It was all about personality. It was all about the soundbite. It was all about who's more likable or dislikable. And I think that's what a lot of people are frustrated with, that it really hasn't been about true policy difference. And part of it is just the negativity of the campaigns. There was all this kind of name calling by the different party leaders, accusations and counter accusations and the gotcha moments that I think the public was really ill served by the parties, that they really didn't get a good sense of what they all stood for, what the real differences were, or even the fact that there could be some compromise on some of these issues. I mean, there was no nuance. It was very much binary choices that all related to who do you like best, as opposed to who's actually going to solve these pressing issues. And these aren't easy things to do. I mean, poor Kim Campbell's always brought up on these things, where she famously had said that an election campaign is not the time to deal with serious policy issues. But part of it is that they're really thorny. If you look at basic income, that's actually a provincial level of jurisdiction. So for the federal government to come in and have some policy that's coherent, it actually requires that they negotiate with the provinces. And some of the different parties try to launch those kinds of discussions on various issues. The Conservatives, for example, on the energy corridor. But that was all predicated on the fact that you need some sort of buy-in by the provinces. Similarly, the NDP, even with their pharmacare program, requires some provincial government buy-in. And I think that's what makes it so difficult to actually have these policy discussions, is because the uncertainties are so great, dealing with so many different jurisdictions, so many other different political parties at that provincial level.
Yeah, just about 10 minutes left here in our conversation. I want to get to another couple of ridings here that we can talk about that are, we think, in play tonight and will help tell us the story of what happens in the province of Ontario. One of them, Laura, is Newmarket Aurora. Tell me about that.
That's right, Peter. It's, again, one of the 905 ridings that kind of ring around Toronto, and they're the ones that both parties are trying to get or hang on to. So Newmarket Aurora, the first MP in this riding was Belinda Stronach. Remember her? Mm-hmm. She was elected as a Conservative, and then she crossed the floor to the Liberals. That's a shot of the farmers market going on in Newmarket Aurora. Again, small town surrounded by sprawling suburbs. So Belinda Stronach, she was Conservative. She became a Liberal, and that's the way that this riding is flip-flopped. This is Tony Van Bynen. He is running for the Liberals. The incumbent chose to not run again in this election. He is a longtime mayor of Newmarket, so very well known. Lois Brown, she held the riding here for the Conservatives from 2008 to 2015. She is a well-known businesswoman, wants to get it back. And the NDP candidate, this is Yvonne Kelly. She's a social worker who has run before, so she has some name recognition within the riding. She's been involved with issues around food insecurity, anti-poverty strategies, affordable housing, and I should note it's quite a wealthy riding, but it does have 3 homeless shelters in its area. So affordability, housing affordability, big issue in this riding as well.
Right. How big are those? What did you hear from people when it came time to these conversations around these communities that ring Toronto, and where a lot of people have to get back and forth, right? I mean, you mentioned commuting's the big issue.
Well, that's the thing, and I think that one of the reasons the Conservatives are having some play in these ridings is that transit pass rebate that they're promising. A lot of these people have to take the train into Toronto every day, and it's expensive. I didn't realize between $350 to $500 a month just to take the train into the city. And then once you're at Union Station, which is the hub, then you've got to take more transit to get to wherever you're going. So that's quite an affordability issue. And something like the Conservative promise to give back some of that money could have some resonance here.
Laura, any thoughts on that and the challenges for, what will drive the vote for some of these people in those outlying areas?
Well, certainly Newmarket Aurora is one of those ridings that the federal Conservatives look at and say, if we can't win Newmarket Aurora again, we can't win government. They're really expecting to take that one back. The other Laura brings up great points about the transit situation, and it is interesting. We've talked about Premier Doug Ford and the fact that he hasn't been around at all during this campaign, said he wouldn't get involved, but he has had a couple of successes during the campaign in his silence. One is avoiding the educators' strike in Ontario. The other is support for his government's transit plan from both the Conservatives and reluctantly somewhat the Liberals. So this is something, as Lydia said, that the province needs to work on with the federal government. And I think voters voters see that as a necessary thing, even if the two levels are polar opposite, if they don't get along, if it does indeed end up that Justin Trudeau forms government again tonight, even in a minority situation. I think people want transit is huge. It's a necessary thing for everyone's lives in the Toronto area. They want the two levels of government to be able to work together and
ahead here. So if it's a Liberal minority supported by New Democrats, what's the relationship with Doug Ford then?
Well, I think at the end of the day, they still have to play with the people who are in government. I mean, the Doug Ford government, even though it seems like they've been around for a long time, they have only been in power for about 18 months. So, you know, they still have a long life ahead of them, and perhaps they might be in government longer than this next one federally, depending on, you know, how the votes turn out and whether or not we have a vote of non-confidence in a year or two. So, you know, I think it's incumbent upon whoever forms the federal government to play nice with Ontario. It is the biggest bloc of voters, and you don't want to, you know, necessarily make the premier your enemy. I know that was Justin Trudeau's gambit in this campaign. I think it might have. Might backfire a bit on him because as Laura says, you have the fact that we didn't have the support workers strike for education. There have been a number of announcements on transit, and those are the bread and butter issues that people vote on. And the Conservatives have been savvy on a number of these things. They have micro-targeted middle-class people. They've micro-targeted transit as a really important part of their platform, but also people with families, bringing back popular tax breaks like the education break for, you know, piano lessons, or the sports tax credit for kids in organized sports. So those are things and areas where the Conservatives might make some gains, and it would be very difficult for the Liberals to completely reject that and to wage war against the premiers. Remember, it's not just Doug Ford, it's also Jason Kenney, it's the premier of Manitoba, and in Atlantic Canada. So yeah, so there's a lot of people they could potentially alienate. And remember, it's still the same voter. I mean, people, even if Canadians give the Liberals a mandate, those are the same people who gave Conservative parties provincially mandates.
Okay, one last quick ride. I've got about 90 seconds. We're going to scoot through Parkdale High Park, which is not in the burbs, it's in the middle. So tell me about that.
Yeah, so Parkdale High Park, I don't know if we're going to take a look at it here, but it's right in the downtown Toronto, just to the west of Toronto. Incredibly diverse, has a big Tibetan population there. It's a big split socioeconomically. You've got really low-income areas and really wealthy areas of Toronto that are part of this riding. But it is a very socially conscious riding. So it is even you know, the wealthier you think may be more right-leaning, they're not. And there's Arif Virani. He's the Liberal incumbent. He was first elected in 2015. He only won by about 1,000 votes. And he's running against NDP candidate Paul Taylor. This riding has gone back and forth in the last couple of years. It's traded off between Liberal and Conservative, and it is very tight right now. It's looking like it might edge towards Liberal, but we don't really know, because Paul Taylor is putting up a really tough campaign, especially in an area and in a riding where affordability is a major issue.
Very quick comment, final quick comment to you, Laura Stone. That's kind of what's really interesting about watching in Ontario, right? Because you have some fights that are largely Liberal Conservative, then you've got some that are Liberal NDP in the heart of the city, right?
Right. I mean, this is where it all chips away potentially at the chances of another Liberal majority. I mean, they're facing a tough fight in the outskirts of the Toronto area with the Conservatives. They're facing a tough fight in some ridings in downtown Toronto with the NDP, with disaffected progressive voters who are disappointed in the Liberal government, who want to elect a member who represents more progressive policies on affordable housing, affordable childcare, climate change. So they're kind of being attacked on all fronts, and it's difficult to, when you do the math, to see how the Liberals would ensure another majority. So it's going to be a tough fight for them, certainly kind of out of the city and within it as well.
All right, Laura Stone, Lydia Miljan, Laura Di Battista, Sherelle Evelyn, thank you all for your time. That's our hour in Ontario, Battleground Ontario, 121 seats on the line this evening, and it may well determine, once we get through Ontario and Quebec too, we'll have a pretty good idea, I think, about how the night's going to unfold. Thank you all for your time, and stay tuned with phone calls as well coming up in the next few minutes. Mark Sutcliffe will be here with Have Your Say, and our Vote 2019 coverage continues right here on CPAC. Stay with us.
Stretching from Clarington in the east all the way to Niagara Falls in the west, but not including the city of Toronto, the 905 is a wide sweep of the Greater Toronto Area that uses the same telephone area code. Because of demographic and lifestyle similarities among its voters, the 40 ridings in the 905 are thought to be a key battleground for parties hoping to win in Ontario.
That is very interesting, and I hope they vote. I hope the millennials get out and vote, because they haven't done it in the past.
The number of voters who are coming out to vote is very, very small. I think that if we can get more millennials out to vote, I think that they'd have a huge impact in the results of the election.
I think it had a huge effect on the last election. I think Trudeau did a really good job of appealing to millennials. I think that's a bad thing overall, because I don't like Trudeau, but I think millennial voters have a huge say in the election if they turn out and vote. So I think Andrew Scheer needs to appeal a little bit more to millennials.
I'm not sure they're as committed to voting and to the democratic process. So I think it's a big question mark.
But we need them to vote. We need them to think really hard about how and do it.
They could have actually a big impact as I think of the last election. I did not myself think that the Liberals would win, but when I talked to younger people, I saw that they would cover some issues that would be important to them, and I think that's why they had a big impact already in the last election.
They are more liberal. They are more, I think, united. They are more united than even older people, I think, because they live here for all their lives. They want to create the future or the environment or the society that they want to do, to live in, and this is their rights,
If you're struggling, whether you're 20 years old or 30 years old, because that is the millennial demographic now in terms of, maybe you went to school, you're struggling with student debt, and you're struggling finding a job that's applicable to your skills in terms of actually meaningful wage and meaningful income. Certain policies and maybe different platforms will appeal to you.
Oh, huge. They're connected way more than old guys like me. Okay? They're connected, I'm not. And they're going to make a huge difference. I think whatever party is able to get them on their side, they're going to get in.
How many federal ridings are there in Canada?
Yeah, I'll say maybe 90.
276, I think.
356?
358.
26.
56.
Your choices are 290, 308, 338.
290, 308, or 338?
290.
I'd say 338.
238.
It's 338, guys.
Canada's vast geography and scattered population is divided into 338 electoral districts or ridings in the House of Commons. One representative or member of parliament is elected for each riding. The number of ridings in a province is based on its population.
Justin Trudeau casts his ballot in Montreal. Jagmeet Singh gets out the vote in Burnaby, British Columbia. Yves-François Blanchet casts his vote in Shawinigan, Quebec. Have your say. Welcome to the program. I'm Mark Sutcliffe. Thank you for joining us on CPAC. It is Election Day, and by the way, we are expecting Andrew Scheer to do some get out the vote event in just minutes from now in Saskatchewan. So we'll be going to that live as soon as it begins. All of the federal party leaders have been back in their home ridings today, casting ballots, rallying supporters. Tonight they'll be eagerly awaiting the results to see if 40 days of campaigning was enough to bring their party to victory. Did the promises they made resonate with voters? Were their policies clear? Our question to you on this election day: what is the deciding factor in how you are voting? Call us at 1-877-296-2722 or tweet us at CPAC_TV. You can also email us at haveyoursay@cpac.ca. We'd love to hear from you. Joining us for our discussion on Election Day are Paul Adams from Carleton University, Francis Abel, also from Carleton University, Theo Argytas from Bloomberg News, and Maura Forrest of the National Post. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Great to be here. Maura, what do you think on Election Day? What are you going to be watching for when the results start coming in tonight?
Well, I suspect it might be a late night compared to 2015 when, we sort of saw the election called pretty early in the night once it was clear that all of Eastern Canada, or all of the Atlantic provinces at least, had gone Liberal. I think we're unlikely to see that this time. I think one of the things I'm going to be looking for is really sort of some kind of regional divisions. I think we're seeing the Bloc Québécois obviously surging in Quebec. I think we're expecting the Bloc to take a large number of seats in Quebec, likely. The NDP, by contrast, probably going to be nearly shut out of Quebec, but, will likely Eastern Canada. So I'm going to be looking for some of those kind of real regional divisions. But I think at this point, it's really tough to say exactly what's going to happen tonight. I think we're in for a long.
Mm-hmm. Francis, what do you